This is John from Victory. We're joined by Emer Reynolds, director of The Farthest, which is showing at the Audi Dublin Film Festival on Sunday, the 26th of February.
That's correct.
Thank you very much for joining us. I was really looking forward to talking to you because a few years ago, as a birthday present, I got a book Carl Sagan and a few others wrote called Murmurs of Earth, and it was about the work they did on the golden record that's been sent into space on the Voyager spacecraft. And I was reading it and thinking, I'd really like to make a documentary about this. You were already in production on this documentary, The Farthest, which is about just that and about sort of the voyage of the Voyager spacecraft as a whole. And I was just wondering, how did you get involved in this project? How did you discover this incredible story?
Well, I've had a massive love of space and science since I was a child myself, although I never read Murmurs of Earth. I wish I had. When I did read it last year, or a couple of years ago when I was in research, I thought it was just fantastic to read the first-hand accounts of it.
Yeah.
So after we made, John Murray, the producer, and I, after we made our last film, we were talking about future projects and discovered massive love of space and science and a bit of an obsession with Voyager in each of us, which was really wonderful. And we started looking into making a film about the Voyager spacecraft. And coincidentally, that very weekend, NASA announced that Voyager 1 had just left our solar system and was the first human-made object into interstellar space. So it was a lovely confluence and coincidence of talking about making a film, and then this moment in time where you thought, actually, we could make a film and, and sort of like at least centre some of it around this historic moment.
My documentary, I probably would have just called it Voyager or something unimaginative, but the title is just such an important thing to get right. So how did you settle on The Farthest?
John Murray came up with the title, and the first day he said it, I just thought it was really quirky and cinematic, a kind of an odd title where you'd go, ooh, what one is that, And I certainly at one stage we were thinking of trying to call it Voyager, but every time we mentioned the word, people thought we were talking about the Star Trek series.
Actually, yeah, that's a good point. It is an incredible voyage the spacecraft goes on, but I suppose the association with Star Trek might have caused problems.
Or got people into the cinema.
With the right branding and font, and if had I made this documentary, I probably would have focused more on the contents of the golden record, because it was the time capsule Carl Sagan and a team around him had sent into space. Should aliens ever find it, and they'd have some idea of what human civilization was like. And so Murmurs of Earth was written by various members of the team about how they selected like images and music to go on it. Probably for the best you directed it, though, because you then brought in, and I'm largely focused on the scientific journey and the contribution to science the Voyager spacecraft made. And I think that's even discussed in the movie, how often the focus is on the time capsule and the golden record. What was your approach to figuring out the story and how you would tell, like, not just about the golden record, but about the whole sort of development and journey of the spacecraft?
Well, I saw it as it's obviously it's a film about the Voyager spacecraft, but the film, I wanted it to be basically three intertwined stories. So the first story is of the spacecraft itself and the people who designed, built and flew it, about where it went, what it discovered, where it is now, the first human-made object to leave the solar system and in interstellar space. So it's an extraordinary adventure story of this scientific bravado, this dream that came out of the 1970s and flew through the solar system at massive speeds. So it's really exciting. Then there's the second story, which is the golden record and the people and the dream of that. How would you communicate civilization to extraterrestrials, were we ever to meet any, and all the story of how they chose the music, how they chose the images, the team, all that. And then of course the third story is linked to that. Well, it's linked to both. It's I think all great documentaries take a kind of a spine, a real story, and then have the opportunity to kind of branch out into bigger ideas or, a way to expand the idea out. So because Voyager is going to become, it's likely to be the only remnant of our existence in the future. It'll outlive humanity. It'll still be out there in the galaxy when the Earth is burnt to a crisp by the dying sun. So it kicks up all these big cosmic questions, the primal questions. Why are we here? What's it all for? Is there anyone out there? Are we alone? So the film was conceived as a kind of a dialogue between all those three strands, you know. So I was trying to keep all those balls in the air. And obviously, I mean, the greater part of the story is the Voyager journey itself, just because of the magnitude of it, a 40-year scientific adventure. But, you know, it's the human story as well of the Golden Record and the primal questions.
Yeah, and I suppose Carl Sagan was saying that a lot of it was about what it says about us at that point in history in the 1970s, where it was, as much as it would be a statement for potential aliens find it was also a reflection of us and what kind of impact that would have.
Absolutely, because the chances of it ever being discovered by an alien is remote, is nearly too, you know, that's putting too much emphasis on it. It's likely to be never found. It's just going to be in empty interstellar space for all time. It'll only be found if there is a civilization who are capable of traveling in interstellar space. It won't actually come close to a star system or a planet for hundreds of millions of years, perhaps never. So it's only likely to be found by a race of beings were they to exist who could travel. So in fact, they knew, even as they were putting it together, you'll recall from Murmurs of Earth, they knew that they were really talking to the people of Earth when they put it together. You know, what would we say about ourselves? How would we represent this planet? So those were the conversations. It was a love letter to humanity at that time and going forward to now, and it's been borne out by the continued conversation to do with what's on it, what's not on it. You know, they never showed any pictures of war. They didn't show any pictures of religions. You know, they were very 70s in some of their tastes on it.
Yes.
The nude pictures of the man and woman were not allowed by NASA, you know, because there was a sensitivity to nude pictures in space. Equally, things like the record was kicked off with a speech by Kurt Waldheim, who was the then Secretary General of the United Nations. And subsequent to that time and the capsule being already in space, long afterwards, he was discovered to have been a Nazi in Austria during the war. So, you know, so it has all these really interesting comments on a moment in history on Earth.
Definitely, and I mean, even just and about that process of selection where they were deciding they'll put their positive self forward first and not sort of. I think they said if we included a picture of an atomic bomb, that might seem like we were boasting or
aggressive,
looking to start a fight, or and just and I think there was a part that really interested me was just about the selection of music, because they only had 90 minutes to get across music from all the world's different cultures, and they finally have a list ready. And I think Sagan was telling a story about there was some Irish American congressman who was asking him, could we put a piece of Irish music on it?
Danny Boy.
And he wanted it to be Danny Boy. That's the annoying. There's so much better Irish music you could pick. But Carl Sagan had to explain to him, well, we couldn't include everyone. And he's like, yeah, but Ireland is an important culture. And Sagan was telling him, well, yes, but I'm Jewish, and Jewish is an important culture, but I didn't put any Jewish music on it. So they had to. There was also that. Do you want to tell the story about the Beatles and just they were meant to be included on the record?
Yeah,
what happened?
They approached the Beatles record company. It's rumoured, the song they were looking to put on is rumoured to be Here Comes the Sun, which would have been a beautiful addition to the record. And the publishing company wouldn't give them the clearance to use it. Said they didn't license for outer space. So
they were worried that they wouldn't get royalties in case another civilization.
Yeah. And Frank Drake, who's the founder of SETI, the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, and the discoverer of the Drake equation, which is a famous equation that aims to try to calculate the possibility of aliens in the universe or on any given planet. He says, we said to them, but it's going into outer space. It'll never be, heard by humans. And they said, no, they wouldn't permit it. So it's a terribly funny story. Short-sightedness of it.
I hate the story more every time I hear it, because it is, it's exactly that. It's the focus on the material and the sort of legalese and the, how's this going to affect our money on Earth? And they just were blinded to the sort of like bigger picture about what it would mean. And I definitely think Frank Drake spoke to that very powerfully, and he's absolutely a huge name in physics.
I was massively starstruck when I met him. He's a beautiful man, and we had a wonderful interview with him. And with him and people involved in the Voyager project, and Carl Sagan's son, what was it like getting to sit down with these people and talking to them about? The way they were putting it was.
like that this will be remembered as the mission of the 20th century, that should our civilization continue and get further into space, this will be considered a huge landmark. So like, what was it like actually contacting them and then finally being able to sit down and talk with them?
Oh, you know, it's not a cliche. It is a cliche, but I mean it. It was a massive honour, and we were incredibly starstruck by all of them. They're such huge names in space technology, you know, in that whole world, and just to actually sit and talk. We made massive effort to have a lot of time for each interview. So I think each interview lasted over 3 hours, and we interviewed over 30 people, and they were all these giants of space sciences. And as you say, including Nick Sagan, who was only a little boy at the time. He was 7 years old when they put his voice on the golden record. And he was telling me, like in his interviews, we were trying to capture a feeling in the interview that was of intimacy and honesty and humour, you know, to try to tap into the human experience of what it was like for all these people. So we had wonderfully long, rambling, casual kind of feeling in the interview. And I think they responded very well to our crew. We're all Irish. Well, Irish-based. Our sound recordist is Kiwi Horgan, who's a New Zealander, but lived in Ireland for the last 30 years. So, you know, we had a really nice atmosphere. It was quite warm and inviting. And as a result, they spoke very, very intimately and honestly. And, you know, we had such wonderful interviews. Nick Sagan told about, as a child, his father would have dinner parties with Isaac Asimov and Robert Heinlein, and they would all be in his house and chatter. Because my eyes were on stalks. I was so excited to hear this story. So really, how we came upon them and how we chose who to have in the film. Claire Strong, the producer, and I went on a whistle-stop research tour of the States. We think we did 12 cities in 8 days. We met like a serious amount of people who were involved in the project and in the Golden Record. And then, you know, we're trying to find a cast of characters that would really communicate, you know, who wouldn't speak in jargon, you know, who'd want to try to tell this exciting, wonderful story to as broad an audience as possible. So,
okay, carrying on Sagan's tradition in a way, I suppose.
Yes, exactly. He hasn't fallen far from the Sagan tree. You know, Nick Sagan certainly has that turn of phrase and that poetry.
And it is extraordinary just seeing him process it as an adult then, when he was included in the selection of the world's languages, where they got a few dozen languages and had people say something. So as an 8-year-old, he said hello from the children of planet Earth, and it like him processing how billions of years from now that's still potentially something that could be heard. And you know, I've made short documentaries myself, and even on a short, like the amount of footage you have to look through and pare it down, like how do you go through that process?
Like I said, we interviewed over 30 people. I think we had 118 hours of interview. And the editor, Tony Cranston, and I really had our work cut out for us to try to distill the story down from such a well. I mean, it was all gold dust. You know, we could have made 10 films out of the material we had. You know, there's so much detail, there's so much anecdotes, there's so much humanity and humor and joy in all the stories. You know, so how did we? You know, you're just trying to distill it down to the essence of the story, and
like a 2-hour length. I mean,
every interview I think I did was over 3 hours. So
right, so even just one interview alone would have been longer than the finished running time. Yeah.
There was a moment in one of the interviews with one of the NASA scientists where he kind of slid down in his chair and kicked off his shoes. And I thought to myself, oh, right, now we're really getting somewhere, you know, because he's relaxed and he wants to talk as though there's no camera here, and you know, and that was the feeling I got from most of the interviews, which was very rewarding. You have to work very hard, as you know yourself. You have to work very hard in the interview to encourage the interviewee and to stay engaged and to really listen, you know, not to drift off on your own agenda, you know.
What did you say? Kidding. Of course, you have a distinguished career as an editor on some of the big projects in recent history of Irish film. So, I mean, that must have stood to you then when you are trying to sort of, you know, keep the bigger picture in mind of, you know, what the 2-hour movie is going to be like.
Yeah, I definitely bring that skill set to the table when I'm directing. you can't wash that out of your experience. It's very much part of how I think and operate when I'm trying to make a film. But I do also very consciously try to not be the editor when I'm directing. I try to think like a director would, which is I'm just going to film whatever I feel like and not try to rationalize how this might go in the finished film or whether I need it or not. So I try to throw off those shackles and then leave enough room for Tony Cranston in this case, but whoever the editor would be, that they would have then their role, their voice, their responses to what I give or to what I find out in the field.
I attended a lecture I went to IDT Dunleary, and when I was in college, we had a guest lecture from Tony Lawson, who's an editor who's worked with Neil Jordan and Stanley Kubrick, no less. And it got to a point where he said everyone thinks they can edit. Like, people will accept that to be a cinematographer or an art director or some technical job, you need to work on developing a certain skill set, and it's kind of closed off to most people. But because editing software is so widely available now, everyone thinks they can arrange clips and edit because it's instinctive. I mean, like, is editing instinctive, or are there certain skills you need to develop to be a great editor?
It's a great thing that there's been a democratization where people can get the machines and software on their phone, on their laptop, and actually put together films. But of course, the skill of editing is a much broader skill than what that implies. You need to be a king, so storyteller first and foremost. You need to understand film grammar on a very, very submolecular level. There's so much minutiae and intricacies to how 1, 2, 3 shots go together, what they mean towards each other, how they influence each other, and over the course of a 5-minute stretch of a film, a 25-minute stretch, an hour-long stretch. There's like ripples in a pond through every change you make in a film. So it's an invisible art form, but it requires, I think, the same amount of training and study and devotion as any of the crafts in film.
It is the final arrangement of the footage. So yeah, absolutely. Or making the film the third time, to use the tired expression. How would that work out then when you're deciding what music to use when? Because as someone already familiar with the Golden Record, I recognized every single piece of music as it was coming up. But how did you decide when to use the jazz piece or the classical piece or whatever?
Yeah, that was pure spontaneous editing experience. Tony would try different pieces of the Golden Record music in certain sections, and would show me, and I would respond accordingly. Loved some, wasn't sure about others. We were trying to find, we couldn't use every piece of music, and there's 27 pieces of music, so we couldn't use every piece. So we were trying to find a selection that would give you the flavour of the Golden Record. And of course, it was also tied in with the score in the film, which is by the wonderful Irish composer Ray Harman, which is is a very modern score that's holding the whole film together as a unit. And then also there were commercial tracks in there that I was choosing as my voice in the film.
Like the Carpenters and stuff.
Exactly.
And I would have loved it if, my only note about the film is in the credits music, you used Here Comes the Sun, just as a screw you to the Beatles record company. Yeah, I think that would have been nice. But
did you like I loved the last song. In fact, the last song it's the only commercial track in the film that isn't from the 70s. All the rest of them were from before 1977, which was when Voyager was launched. So
that's good for grounding it, I suppose.
Yeah, no, in my mind, I kept thinking Voyager. In Voyager's mind, it's still the 70s. Voyager doesn't know the music of Earth has moved on. So Voyager is still thinking in this way. But the final song, even though it has a 70s sound to it, it's a more modern song by an American artist called Archer Pruitt. And actually, I found it. It was part of the genesis of making the film, because I heard it on by 10 years ago, driving one night, late night, driving home from Belfast, and I heard it on a radio show, and the lyrics of it were so pertinent to Voyager, and I was like, if I ever make a film by Voyager, I'm going to use this track.
What is great about the documentary, though, is that it's dealing with science, and it's charting like this huge endeavor in science, but you don't approach it in a dry way. There is a very strong visual sensibility to the film, and particularly any of these shots in outer space, you seem, Am I right in saying that there seemed to have been a mix of CG and some more like paint-based kind of effects, or could you talk about like what that process was like, finding somebody to develop those shots?
So I'd say the visual landscape of the film, there are a number of key protagonists and key collaborators there. One is Kate McCulloch, who shot it, who's a long-term collaborator of mine, a magnificent visionary filmmaker, and I just love her eye. You know, she can point the camera at anything, and I just love whatever she sees. I think it's beautiful. We really wanted it to be epic and elegant and modern. Then Joe Fallover, who's a wonderful production designer, he was brought in to kind of imagine a world, a kind of a supportive, immersive, spacey world where we could riff on some concepts to do with aliens and to do with outer space, and not actually always have to be using CGI. So we did really inventive, playful things like filmed paint bouncing on the top of a music speaker, you know, slow motion globules of paint, and really macro photography of chemical explosions, and and all that stuff was drawn to try to be a visual language for the madness of what we were talking about.
It's very Kubrick. It's very like Douglas Trumbull, who did the special effects on 2001: Space Odyssey and Tree of Life, and so it's that kind of style mixed with the CG. I thought that was good to sort of change it up a bit.
Yeah, exactly. So and then the third element was the CGI, which was done by a wonderful Irish artist called Ian Kenny, all from his small studio in Monkstown. And he did it all on his own, and it's extraordinarily epic and beautiful. So it was a third way where we might immerse. It was all in the service of immersing the audience in this epic story.
I can't wait to see it on the screen in the Savoys that we're showing.
Yeah.
And that's going to be something you don't want to miss. Like even the opening shots, there was a lot of shots just facing upwards to the sky. How did that image come to mind? Was that between you and Kate, or is that? It was just the idea of looking out to the sky and trying to, I suppose night photography would be different, because what kind of exposure would you need to get like stars? But I think it's just about just thinking of how the sun lights up the sky so that's blue, but the stars are still out there, and it's just like, it seems like a very strong image to open the film with.
I mean, that came from a dream I had, and a line that I had put in the proposal, which was to do with, that we're a land-based creature looking upwards, that we have this instinct to look out and wonder. And I thought that the time-lapse photography, when you see the stars wheeling and all that, I think it's really, really beautiful, but I thought it was perhaps overused a little bit. So I was trying to find a language that would tap into that idea of looking up at the stars. And when we did the first one, we were trying to test, it was kind of quite a complicated cinema rig for the red dragon to be upside down and looking straight up, and to be gyroscopically balanced and all that. So we had to do a number of tests to do it. And when I saw the first one, which was daylight and looking up, Kate and I were both really struck by how it pulled you into that idea that you're still in space, even though it's daylight. The stars are all still out there, Like, it just seemed to really, in a nice, fresh way, really register that idea very strongly.
And I think another visual thing you incorporated were children's paintings from Irish schools, which I thought was a nice touch, because, I suppose the time capsule on the Voyager... is going to have this, reflection of human culture in it. I would consider the documentary important in its own right as a reflection on that, but you managed to include some artwork from young kids in Irish schools. Like, did you go around just asking them to paint aliens, or what did you do?
That was, my sister is a teacher in Raheny. My niece is in primary school, and I just asked their help to get some of their classmates and teachers in their schools to ask the students just to paint. I think I gave them a brief of 3 things. I asked them to paint what aliens had looked like. I asked them to paint their idea what space made them think. And then I asked them to paint the future, because I remember when I was in school being asked to imagine, in fact, it must have been around now I was picturing, I think it was 2020 we were asked to paint.
Oh, okay. What did you predict?
I had everyone living in space stations, a kind of what would you call it, like a halo around the Earth, flying cars and all that. But definitely thought we were going to be much further ahead with all the cool sci-fi gear than we actually are. I think give it another 50 years, we might be at that point. We might need to be at that stage, because this place would be ruined.
Yeah. Actually, before we get into that and that whole aspect of it, I was just something else had occurred to me that another mind-blowing thing about the Voyager, and the documentary goes into like all the data they collected on the planets that like they'd never been able to before, but they were doing this on computer systems that had very low processing power compared to now, and like some of them were even defensive about it, like just saying, look, it's what we had to work with at the time. They were basically saying the most powerful computer in the world at the time would have been, was it powerful as a smartphone or a key fob, or
less computing power than a key fob.
I mean, it's astonishing to think how they still had this computer that could be billions of miles from Earth, but they can reprogram it and send back all these images. Like, and it's just sort of a crazy reflection on the speed of the technology's development that we'd have so much more capability for data now in our phones.
Exactly, but I think certainly one of the suggestions for why it's doing so well and why it has lasted so long was that it was more simple than we might build now. That it's almost like a classic car, that it's robust, it doesn't have 1,000 million moving parts, that it's a kind of a basic design that's capable of achieving an awful lot, but it's not overly complicated.
I wonder, did any of the interviewees get into how the space program has sort of developed since then? Because at the time there were all these like groundbreaking discoveries about the solar system, but then events would happen like the Challenger explosion or other things where did public opinion in America seem to turn against it, or is there still a progression of space exploration that as NASA would like to see?
I mean, it's changed a lot around then, after Challenger, and subsequently, obviously, the space shuttle and all that was shut down. Human manned flight was closed down. It became focused on robotic missions, and something as kind of as visionary or as maybe wild as a grand tour of the outer planets like Voyager was. Those kind of missions became less and less, but they are still, they've had orbital missions around Jupiter and Saturn for years now, and they've discovered amazing things. They've landed probes on one of Saturn's moons, like last year or 2015 they got out to Pluto for the first time, so there's still the ambition and the madness and the scientific curiosity. They're perhaps, it's just in a different way now.
I mean, I suppose President Donald Trump is apparently in favor of more of space exploration. On the other hand, he's a climate change denier and is trying to gut climate science and all sorts of science funding. And it just feels like at the moment the world is just regressing into nationalism and factionalism, anti-intellectualism, anti-science sort of movements springing up around the world. And along comes your documentary, which is, I suppose, re-articulating Carl Sagan's more cosmic perspective, where national boundaries seem petty, even though they're still so important to people. Do you think, and like maybe your film will help, but do you think there is a way of bringing the public towards a more cosmic view of things, like where you can consider the bigger picture of, I suppose, how astonishing the Voyager project was, but also just what does that mean for how we're living on Earth?
I know I would love to think the film would certainly be part of that dialogue, in terms of that perspective. Certainly the pale blue dot, which is the photograph the Voyager took from nearly 4 billion miles away, that showed the Earth as this tiny little, less than a pixel, little mote in space, in the way that caused a kind of a paradigm shift when it was revealed, and people saw Earth in that way. I think that space exploration and films about that perspective can really help people at least ask the question about, my film certainly asks the question, could we be alone? Could this be the only planet that harbours life in this vast, enormous universe? And if so, if it is, or indeed if there is other life out there but we've no chance of ever encountering it, what a responsibility it places upon us to protect it and to take care of life, all life, plant life, animals, micro.
I hope there would be a revival of those kind of ideas.
It would be wonderful. It would be an honour to think that the film would even play have a tiny voice in that conversation.
Well, I mean, the film has important things to say, and aside from that, it's really visually impressive and really coherently tells this incredible story about the voyage of the two Voyager spacecrafts. So this will be on the big screen, the Savoy, on Sunday, the 26th of February. It's not to be missed. I thought it was fantastic. We appreciate you coming into Film Ireland to talk to us about it.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Do join us again.
Thank you.